history racket from the early days was all about the achievements of dead white men or great battles that changed the course of history and sent thousands of young men to an early grave. This is not that. Instead, you're here to spend an hour talking about one of the most mundane and common objects known to man. The brick. What is wrong with y'all? God. All right. Now, after Henrik Hudson sailed his famous ship, the Halve-Maja and the Half Moon, up the river that came to be named for him. In the years following, the Dutch named each stretch of the Hudson River for some prominent feature to aid in their navigation and count their progress up from what was New Amsterdam to Beaverwick, what we know as Hudson today. In our stretch of river, they noticed 5 bright white hills that they call the Klauvers. And they named this stretch of river the Klauver Rachen. Klauver, as we know it today. Well, old Klauver beer feed, and get this in Albany. Now, we know what these look like. Actually, I know what they look like thanks to my friend Conrad Wiesba, who turned me on to the fact that a couple of painters at the Hudson River School had actually painted these hills. And where is my up arrow? I'm afraid to touch this. Joe, where's your up arrow? There we go. All right. Just an orientation. We're going to concentrate on the years from 1880 to 1920. This was a time when our area was the largest brick producer in the world. And we're talking numbers not in the thousands, not in the millions, but in the billions. In the billions. Now here is one of the pictures from the Hudson River School. And here is City of Hudson. He's sitting on Thomas Cole's property on the other side of the river. And these are white hills. I have not been able to figure out how these are created because they're white. And this wonderful historian from Klauver, Margaret Schramm, said the white coating was magnesium sulfate, Epsom salts. How that happens, I don't know. But under that thin coating, with 30, 40, 50 feet of blue Hudson River clay. Now, unless you're 130 years old, or feel like I do sometimes, you've never seen these. They're gone. They're gone. They were dug out and turned into bricks and put on barges and sent down the river to New York City, where they may be part of a tenement on Essex Street. They might be part of the Croton Reservoir, but they're gone. They disappeared somewhere around 1900, plus or minus a few years. Haven't been able to find out exactly when. There's no mention of them being taken out, but they're gone. Now, just a quick word about geology, okay? Oh, here's a map from 1799, which shows those Klauvers just north of Hudson. Here's North Bay. Now, again, quick word about geology. 14,000 years ago, we would have been under a mile of ice and snow. You've all heard of the glaciers and the ice age and everything. Those glaciers dammed the flow of water to the ocean and created a huge lake, which geologists call Glacial Lake Albany. Now, at some point, maybe 11,000 years ago, the ice dam broke, the lake drained, but what was left was the Hudson River. The Hudson River, just here like this. And over the millennia, on the banks of the lake, on the banks of the Hudson River, clay, a fine sediment, was deposited to the point where you've got 30, 40, 50 feet of solid clay right along the banks of our rivers, along with some sand. Now, this is going to be very useful for a number of reasons. First of all, it's right on the river. How convenient can you get? And then you've got the river for transportation too. Okay? Now the brick industry took those harbors away. They also took maybe 1,000 feet of riverbank away, so the cliffs that were there when the Dutch came are 1,000 feet back from the river in many, many, many places. So we've got this stuff called hydrated silicate of aluminum, which we know is clay. And it became a huge industry in our area. Now, here's an early brick-making machine. This is important because bricks used to be molded one by hand. And they weren't great. They weren't well mixed, they were soft. This is an early version. There were many iterations of this through the years, but basically, you put sand, you put clay, you put iron oxide for the nice red color, and the machine does the work, and out comes molded bricks. So, now, a brick is a cuboid. The front of it, where you've got the label, is called the frog. Yes?
What was the power source of that brick making machine?
Steam. Usually it was steam back in the day there. And that means the burning coal. All right? Now, in the heyday of this industry, you had 135 or so brickyards from Haverstraw up to Albany making bricks. 7,000 to 15,000 workers a year making bricks. And things to know about this industry. First of all, you bake bricks in the open air, and we'll discuss a little more about this. Over the wood fires, but a later time, coal fires. The industry was a very, very, very heavy polluter. A very heavy polluter. Today, where people have investigated brick industries in places like South Africa and India, they're unchanged. They're piles of bricks getting baked in the hot sun. 90% of the workers today in places like India that work in the brickyards have respiratory diseases. This is going to be an important factor for the brick industry in our area. Not to mention the fact that soot, fine particles, ash is deposited in the surrounding area. If it's farmland, it degrades the capacity of that land to produce. If it's a neighborhood, I taught for years in the South Bronx, and I loved it, and I loved the kids, and the asthma rates in the South Bronx were insane, because that's where the industry is. So, we're going to look at Catskill in a minute. Imagine what Catskill might have been like. So the bricks are built, were cooked in the open air over coal. The Cary Brickyard, which is just a couple of miles north of Hudson along the river, burnt 100 tons of coal every season, cooking with bricks. What I want to think about now, all right, here's a brick mold. Here's 6 bricks at a time. All right, before we get to Catskill, this is why I'm here today. Because 25 years ago, Julie and I went to Kinderhook and heard a man speak. He was Charles Swain, who was the official black historian of Catskill at the time, speaking in Kinderhook. And he had material with him, and I came away with a pamphlet, The Black Population of Greene County from 1748. And I was most interested in that there were 2 sections of census material. Here is 1905. I said, well, I'm going to bring this back to class. It tells you the jobs that people had. It tells you what kids were in school. It tells you who they lived with. You know, you can slice and dice this 9 ways to Sunday to learn how to derive information from census. But then I was stopped dead in my tracks. Here are 2 lists of people living in boarding houses in Catskill, New York. One on Willard's Alley, the other on Hill Street. These are real close to the river, by the way. The thing about this is you have young black men living in a boarding house in Catskill, New York. Their average age is 25 years old. These are young, strong men, and because they're living in a boarding house, they're not residents of Catskill. They come and go. If this census had been taken in February, they wouldn't have been there, because they came up in April for the season. At first, the brick industry was highly seasonal. You didn't want to dig clay in the dead of winter. All right? But this is what set me off. Something is going on. Young black men are coming to our area. And I've got a couple of quotes. For you. Here's from the Greene County News in 1902. The shared have arrived in small numbers, and the van loans are getting few. The brickyard season has opened, and the dark contingent from Virginia has arrived. All newspapers are snarky, so when they say dark contingent, this is the Times. Then this from the Hudson Republican in 1900, the Colored 400. The steamer McManus brought up 400 Southern darkies for the brickyards at Athens, Stockport, and Coxsackie. 74 were transferred to the steamer General Carr at this city and taken to Stuyvesant. And what is going on? This is the steamer McManus. It was 40 years old when it made this trip, which means it was probably well over its glory days. It might have been taking rich people up the river for a jaunt. And it burned down 2 years after that article. At the pier in New York, steamships love to burn down. So, then this, from 1907. They're talking about the Bartlett Brickyard, just outside of Hudson. You can walk to it in 10 minutes from State Street, okay? This may or may not be a Bartlett brick. I'm careful to make assumptions. B&B company. But this happened in 1907. 2 buildings at the Bartlett Brickyard, just north of Hudson, burned down. Both buildings were completely destroyed. They were comparatively new buildings, having been erected a couple of years ago. Each was 50 by 20 feet, smaller than this room, and 2 stories high. They were occupied in the brickmaking season by the colored people who come from the South to work in the yards. So here we've got a lot of evidence in the time that you have this migration, this seasonal migration from the South to here. All right? And of course, they must have, this is a dormitory. These were bunks. Now, we mentioned pollution, we talked about Catskill. Let's see. Now, here's City Catskill. The brickyards were right along the river, right along the creek. Why was industry always along the water back in the day? Whether you went to the west side of New York, whether you went to Yonkers, whether you went to Newburgh, whether you went to Hudson, whether you went to Catskill, you did not want to live by a river. You did not want to go there. You had pollution, you had bars, you had Diamond Street, the red light district. You had unsavory characters, and brickmakers always had a very bad reputation. You would not want your daughter necessarily to marry a brickmaker, okay? That was the prejudice in that zone. But look at this. Brickyard, black neighborhood, black neighborhood, black neighborhood. This is kind of like what I experienced in the Bronx. Wherever you have an awful environment, that's where the poor live. That's where the poor live. And you can imagine the rates of asthma and other issues in this area. This brick, which is it says Catskill, this special brick, it's called a paver. It's not made with clay, it's made with shale, but otherwise, it was made right here by the shale brick company. Now, here is another piece of evidence. This is a bill from the Ocean Steamship Company to the Denoyles Brickyard down in Hattie Straw. and here are 29 young black men being brought up from Georgia in 1909 to have us go to work in the brickyard. All found in steerage. Do we know what steerage was? Many of our relatives, many of our ancestors came from Europe in steerage. It's the bottom of the boat. No air, engine noise, hot, dirty, smelly, but cheap. So, and this is an interesting story. The Niles brickyard owner sent his son down to Virginia to bring back workers, and he writes this: many times an old trusted employee would be sent several $100s for train fare when the molding season opened. The Denoyles Company had trustworthy Tom Osborne, who lived in Danville. Dad would give him the number of men we needed, and Tom would visit the farms and gain the assent from those who wished to go north to the brickyards. Tom would then round up the men at departure time, perhaps April 5, when the owner ventured south for this purpose, carrying off laborers beyond the state's borders, and was caught. He was in trouble. They had, southern states had laws called anti-enticement laws. It is illegal to offer one of our people a job out of state. They did not want to lose the black labor. But those laws were obviously very porous because they lost a lot. So, but then, this is an odd image, but try to close your eyes. I was justly proud when I tackled this job several times with me leading 50 or 60 black men with Tom at my side on a walk from Penn Station to the West Shore Ferry, with many an uncertain glance from white folks along the crowded streets. We're talking about 1900. You can imagine the reaction when you get 50 young black men coming down the street toward you. It's just the way times were. Now, how did this change our world? In 20 years, it doubled the black population of Catskill. All right? And I have a suspicion, and there was a lot of other research, the mills in Greene County and Columbia County were not a welcome place for black workers. They did not hire black workers. I suspect that with the brick industry, it loosened up employment opportunities for black people in our county. Again, that would need a little research. But may own brick. Here's an example of a few people who stayed. I just picked these at random, but on the left, these are people that lived in a boarding house in 1905. On the right, they've got jobs, they're in town, they're here to stay 20 years later. Okay? And here's a quick view of Catskill Creek again. This is the Walsh Brickyard here. This is the black neighborhood. Now I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but we'll catch up. Oh, by the way, this is not Catskill High School, right here. All right? Now, to give you an example of the problems that the industry created, this is a brick kiln. Now we think of a kiln, oh, took a pottery course. A kiln is an oven. A brick kiln, this is called a stove kiln or a clamp kiln. There was no building there. It was totally comprised of the bricks. In the bottom, you can see openings where they would put the wood or the coal to bake the bricks. But this is open air, and the pollution is going everywhere. Now, these men who worked in the brickyards over the year, it went through a process. Around the Civil War, you had French Canadians coming down here to make bricks. But in the 70s, you had a flood of Italian workers. And they were followed by a flood of you had Irish workers, and you had a flood of Italian workers, and you had blacks. And by the time we're talking about the year 1900, 60% of the workers in the yards are black people. All right, that's how large the influx of workers was in the South. Now, I want to show you a brick crew. What do you notice about these guys? What do you notice about these guys? You have these guys are probably Italians, but all the rest of them are from the down south. Except, look at these two guys here. Look at these two guys here. What do you notice about them? How old do you think they'd be? 10, 12? He might be 15? When you talk about the year 1900, the United States Department of Labor estimates that 18% of the workers in the mills, in the brickyards, 18% of the industrial workers in this country were between the age of 10 and 15. 1 out of every 5 industrial worker was a child. Not even a young man, woman, a child. Can you imagine what this little boy felt getting up every morning? And what did they do? Children aren't strong necessarily in terms of muscle, but they can do dull, repetitious work. And when the bricks were molded, they were set out in the yard to dry, but they had to be turned so that they dry evenly. And that's what these little boys are doing. You know, there's 100,000 bricks in this yard. They turn each and every one of them. So they use children for this kind of work that did not require a lot of training or a lot of strength. And the brickyards were heavy employers of children. All right. Now, what you need for a brick industry is you need 4 things. You need the materials. And boy, we have the materials right at our fingertips, right on the river. You need workers. Well, we brought them up from Virginia. I mean, you can't, in April, in this area, you couldn't push a button and get 700 people to come work for you. They all were busy with their lives. We imported our workers. You go back to the 1600s, to the Livingstons, to the Germans, the Palatines they brought over. Columbia County has always needed to bring people in to serve its needs. Always. Even today. Although that's a controversial thing to say. That's a very controversial thing to say. But you needed material, you needed transportation. The Hudson River, the fact that the mills were right on the river, that was a gift. That was a gift. I mean, why was GE on the river? Why did they practically kill our river with their pollution? Transportation, and also the river serves as a sewer to get rid of the waste. All right? So this is why, historically, riverfronts were nasty places, not the beautiful places. You know, we're down the river a little ways, and our friends took us to this lovely restaurant on the river with a view across the river to the mountains. That's modern times. That's what we like. It's not what it was like back in the day. But here's the thing now. We had the play, we had the river, we brought in the workers. You need a market. You need a market. Why was our river producing more bricks than any place else on the face of the earth for a couple of decades? Population of the city in 1879, 942,000 people. 40 years later, 5,620,000 people. You have an idea what the rate of growth that is? New York City was adding 100,000 people a year. Year after year after year. For 40 years. I mean, look at our immigration thing now. We can't handle. I mean, we were absorbing and providing the minimum needs of life for 100,000 new people every year. That's the way it was. That's the way it was. And what does this have to do with bricks? What does that have to do with bricks? What did they build with bricks? Here's the Croton Aqueduct, bringing water to New York. That's 300 million bricks. The city sewer system needed another 200, 300 million bricks when they built it. But that's not why bricks became so popular. Here's 1835, the Great Fire, 1835. 52 acres of Lower Manhattan burnt down. It started in a dry goods store. And 700 buildings went up in flames. To make things worse, the exact same thing happened 10 years later, in 1845. New York City passed a bunch of laws, including this example, and a law that is labeled an act for the protection of life and limb. Good name for it. The walls of all buildings shall, below the surface of the ground, be built of stone and brick, laid in cement and mortar. It goes on and on and on. No more wood buildings in Manhattan. This is what happens. So, Julie and I, our first apartment in Manhattan was in a tenement building. 5 floors of brick. 5 floors of brick. wonderful housing. I mean, it was tough living in them, but they also did the job. You look at this 5-story brick tenement. 5 stories because they didn't have elevators. The city said that's as far as you can go without an elevator. You're looking at, in just this one building, 250,000 bricks to make that sucker. And there are 34 of these buildings on an average city New York block. Imagine how many bricks. We're going back to an area where the federal budget was about $900 million a year. I mean, now we don't stop with billions, we talk about trillions. What the heck? Trillion is a fantasy number. So the budget of the country was in the millions. There were only 2 things he counted using the word billion in 1900. One was the stars in the sky, and the other was bricks from us. Here's an example of the relationship between the brick industry and the population growth of New York City. The solid line is the population explosion. The dotted line is the brick industry explosion. Notice anything? All right. Now, I'm doing good. I thought I'd keep you here for 3 hours. All right. I want to talk about closer to home now. Here is the city of Hudson. Here is Mill Street. Here's the dog park they set up. Right outside, over by where the landfill is here, used to be a huge brickworks that started up in the Bartlett Brickyard, then they called themselves the Atlas Brickyard, then their final iteration was the Greenport Brickyard, but it's all the same outfit basically. Maybe the owners changed. I went for a walk with my wife and my brother-in-law, Steve, grew up in Catskill here. He used to go sledding here in the winter. He called this the clay buff, but he really didn't know what the history of it was. So, another thing that set me off on this subject was, here is the city of Hudson. Here is Route 9 and Route 9J. Now, if you drive out of Hudson on Route 9, past the big box stores, up out of town, look to the left. You know what you're going to see? Nothing. There is almost no development, no buildings along the river here, between those roads and the river bend.
Not yet. Yeah.
Now, why is this? Why is this? You would think property with the river view is premium, right? We will get to that why, but here is also 3 of the major brickyards in our area in 1910, 1920. The Atlas, which is right outside of town here, which is now largely managed by Conrad because they've got the Greenport Conservation Area there. Then Newton Hook, Carry Brickyard. Nutton Hook, the Empire Brickyard. My brother-in-law is supposed to take us on a ride up the Hudson River along the bank there to see the ruins of the brickyards north of our city because they're there. All right? Margaret Schramm, who again was a wonderful lady historian, she was an historian down in Harvard. She says the region of the clay pits was changed radically. A whole area of northwest Hudson was dug out. By over 100 years of removing clay to make bricks. Unfortunately, not all the clay was removed. Dangerous slippage still occurs in the vicinity of the clay pits. New York State, here is Mill Street. Here's the Bogardus Brickyard. Here's the Atlas Brickyard. You notice this has almost no vegetation on it, right? Here's Warren Street right here. I mean, this is right practically downtown. And this is a map, I believe, from the state. This is the city of Hudson. This is the city of Stockport. These crosshatches indicate areas where landslide is a clear and present danger. And you'll see that from Hudson to Stockport, all the way up, west of Route 9, west of Route 9J. You don't want to build there because the ground can't hold it. All right? And unless we think this is a part of the past, this is October of last year down in Westchester along the river. When you build on top of clay, especially when you take the vegetation out, clay absorbs water. I mean, my dear sister-in-law Anna complains that the water doesn't drain on her lot because it's clay. You know, you want to build, they do a perk test to see if water passes down through the soil. It doesn't with clay. Clay is like a sponge. It absorbs the water, it gets heavier and heavier, it gets soupier and soupier. And then all you gotta do is maybe undermine the base a little bit, and boom! What would you pay for this house? It's got a crack running all the way up to the front door. This is something we live with because of the geology that was otherwise such a gift to us. Here is, and I'm gonna go quick so I don't keep you forever, but this is Haverstraw. In 1906, the Denoyle Company was mining clay along the riverbank, and the bank collapsed and a third of the town went down the hill with it. There's another picture of the landslide. And then here is Beecraft Mountain, right outside of town here, where the Colarusso gravel pits are, and where they bring out lime. Used to have an outfit called the Knickerbocker cement plant. And since they were turning lime into cement, they had a huge pile of lime here. 3 acres of ground collapsed. 7 workers died, and you had a 30-foot pit. So, now we'll talk a little bit about the plants on the river, and we're getting close to the end. All right, this is the carry yard, the Empire yard. They wound up with about 100 workers. Now they grew to close to 300 workers. This is the carry yard up in Newton Hook. These are the burning bricks, the open air kilns. And this smokestack, it's not taking the burning brick ash away with it. It's taking the smoke from the machine plants away. But you could build this 1,000 feet up. It wouldn't solve the problem. One woman wrote, "My family grew up and worked at the Cary Brickyard. The entire hill opposite side of the river was full of shacks and shanties of different colors, built by different immigrant groups that all gathered to work at the brickyards." I'm going to skip some of what she said, which is very interesting, but that's the way it is. The Empire Brickyard, a little bit up the river from the Carries, they had 300 people living there. They had their own post office. You go back there, no, there's nothing. You know, things changed. Now clay was a dirty job. It was all muscle. Digging, moving bricks. To produce something like you worked at the Cary Yard, you worked at the Empire Yard. You're making 30 million bricks a year. 30 million. Now, just 1 second. Okay. Now, eventually, the industry went into decline. It got competition from the south. It got competition even from Belgium. But more importantly, you got cement. You've got Portland cement. You've got cinder blocks. A lot easier to build with. A lot cheaper to build with. And just as polluting, if not worse. I'm trying to research about local brick making around here. There, what we think is a cement kiln on Doubray Road here. If you had the cement burning over several days, if a stranger came wandering around along at night, homeless, you could lay down next to the warm wall of the cement kiln, be dead by morning, be poisoned. So, in today's world, we've experienced over the last few years quite a lot of debate about these industries. On the one hand, they brought us young, fit people who stayed and added to the community. On the other hand, they were nasty to be around. And beyond that, and give me a second because I want to find something that I skipped, which is relevant. And if not, I'll just paraphrase it. But oh yeah, 1900 there was a very conservative paper in Hudson called the Columbia Weekly Republican. They did not think that women ever should get to vote. All right? And they did not like the brickyards. But they had no problem with the pollution. They had an article called Brickyard Labor. The class of labor employed is, with few exceptions, of the lower foreign element. They have few brains and follow like sheep. It is worth noting that while communities in the brickyards complain about pollution, this paper was only concerned with the fact that Irish, Italians, blacks were joining us in this area. All right? And I mean, if you have an Italian surname, if you have an Irish surname, if you have a Slovak surname, and if your grandmother, great-grandmother came over around 1900, that's what they were saying about your people. They're stupid, they're criminals, they're lazy, we don't want them. This could be the New York Post today. I mean, there's a phrase, there's a saying. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Okay? Okay. Now, in the interest of time, I'll skip over some stuff, but I do want to finish. We are in the.
Excuse me. Where would that be on the river, the Newton Hook? I don't know where that is. What town would it be near?
Oddly enough, Newton Hook and Nutton Hook are practically next to each other. It shows very much a lack of imagination to have two communities that sound so similar right next to it. This side of Stockport.
Okay.
Stuyvesant. Thank you. Right, just to wrap up, we've had two big debates in recent years going on in this town. Get the gravel trucks off the city streets. You've seen that. And then there was the issue of the cement plant, the St. Lawrence cement plant. The staff of Columbia Memorial Hospital in Hudson is on record opposing the plan, claiming the community will experience increased death rates among people with advanced heart and lung disease, increased cancer rates, and worsening asthma in children. Someone else writes, the private roads, and they're talking about the gravel trucks now, explained Clark Wyman, the president of the River District Economic Council. The decision to let the gravel trucks move, flies in the face of a 40-year-old trend toward low-impact service sectors, retail, light industry, and recreation. It violates the spirit and letter of the Hudson's LWRP, which envisions a mixed-use, sustainable waterfront. Most importantly, it ignores earlier planning findings of the potential significant environmental impacts of gravel operations. We have been debating the use of our resources, the use of our waterfront, the use of our land. Do we want coffee shops? Do we want antique stores? Do we want lovely parks? Or do we want the gritty stuff that's been so tough to deal with, but yet has sustained us over years, that brings in new people? I mean, for as nasty as the brickyards were, they brought in healthy, vibrant, young people. You're in a town where the average age is 61. Do you believe that? Austerlitz? If we need people to care for us in our old age, if we need people to build the roof of our house, New York State says rural counties across the state do not have enough people in the present day to fill their requirements. That's the state saying that. We need more people. So this whole subject ties in on a number of different directions, okay? Again, in the interest of time, I want to keep this to an hour on this. I've skipped quite a bit of information I want to throw in here, but I've also thrown some stuff that you might be angry about my saying. I don't know. But the brick industry shaped our community physically and as well as socially. You know, my brother-in-law's last name is Gaudio. He grew up down by the river in Hudson. You know, that's where we are at. I think I'll stop there and ask if anyone wants to yell at me or has any questions. Otherwise, we'll get home to our friends and families. Yes?
I'll just make it brief. So, we live on a former dairy farm, which there are rumors that there was a brick factory on the street behind the property.
I want to visit your place. May I?
Absolutely. We would love you to. But we have found bricks.
Are you up in Dugway here?
Mellonville.
Oh, Mellonville. Okay. Yeah, that's a very different subject because there were small batch brick makers all over. And those bricks are sort of very different from the industrial kind of brick. And, but yeah. Oh, please. Please. Thank you. Are we good? Yes.
How are those bricks shipped from Hudson's in New York by train, by ship?
Mostly by barges. They used sloops in the early days, but barges could fit 100,000 bricks in a run. And back then you went over to the west side of Manhattan, downtown, and there were these huge brickyards where they'd unload the bricks, getting ready to sell them to developers. So, okay, yes.
You said that there were black people that came up from the South, but were these former slaves or people that were still in slavery, that they're
You know,
plantations
let me
hiring them out, or what?
let me say something quick about that because it's one of the things I kind of skipped over. Why were these young men willing to come here? Same reason the Italians were willing to come across the sea.
So
They
were
wanted to
free.
make a decent living.
So they were freed slaves.
They were free people, and we're talking about the 1880s and 1890s, which is 30, 40 years after the end of slavery. But the point is, in Virginia, if you were a black person who worked in a mill, you could earn 75 cents a day. You came up to the Hudson River here, and the base pay was $1.75. Now, for the modern year, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's more than twice the wages. You know, that's why people came. They came in order to make a decent living. So, you know, the Southern Italians were poor. The Irish were recovering from the famine when they came here. People want to live. People want opportunity. And you have a network of churches in the black community which help create the flow. Because if you have an uncle up here, says, hey, I got a job for you. You know, come here and bring your sister. She can cook for us. So it's that raw kind of way that immigration has with itself. So, okay? Yes?
Why do you think the brick makers ventured so far for labor? I mean, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, all these places are a lot closer, so why go all the way
Third,
to
the
Georgia?
main one is seasonality.
Hmm.
April came, the river thaws, the ground thaws, and suddenly you need to push a button and you have several hundred workers. The local communities, people were occupied with their lives. You didn't have that kind of ready labor force to draw from. Down south, you had a group of people that we all learned about how nasty and dangerous Jim Crow was. You had a group of people that were underpaid, that were dirt poor, and that were abused on a daily basis. Would they take an opportunity to come north and make twice the amount of money? You had the labor poor. You had the labor poor down south that you just didn't hear. Okay? Are we good?